Welcome to Chalk Talk with 70sbig.com. I want to talk about a very important exercise, an often misused exercise, called the Romanian deadlift, or the RDL. And it's a movement that someone saw Niku Vlad doing at the Olympic Training Center when he was stateside here in America, and it's been incorporated ever since. But it's an important exercise to develop the hamstrings to help with deadlifting and basically any other hip extension movement. In the deadlift itself, the hamstrings are supposed to maintain, let's say this is your back angle, your hamstrings are coming here. The hamstrings are supposed to maintain their tension in order to maintain the back angle as you push yourself away from the floor and the bar comes up. Once the bar passes your knees, the hamstrings then contract in order to bring your body straight, or in other words, extend the hips to full hip extension. So the hamstrings are working isometrically by holding this back angle in place, and then they shorten to extend the hip. However, the incredible vast majority of people do not deadlift properly, and they instead look like a pooping dog, which looks like this. So when they're pooping everywhere, they're in posterior pelvic tilt, and their lumbar spine is flexed, and their upper spine is flexed, and there's poop coming in their diaper, it's going everywhere. And so there's no hamstring tension when you're like here. And so most people revert to this position and then just use their back muscles and their spine to lock it out. And so many people are going to have lumbar issues and sacral issues, disc issues, blah, blah, blah when they're older. So this is why the RDL can help, because it can help a person not only learn how to put tension on their hamstrings, but also develop the hamstrings so that they actually have mass to do their job and have more of a mechanical efficiency of how they're applying force, and lastly strengthen them because they are larger, and then they can take that and augment the deadlift as well as power cleaning or snatching and other athletic movements. So the hamstrings at the the hamstrings have two functions. They cross the hip and the knee. The upper attachment, or the proximal, is something that extends the hip, which is this way. Hip flexion, extension. The second thing they do is they flex the knee, and that's their distal or lower function. So they will flex the knee, just like this. This is important for here in a second. So how you do the RDL is that you're going to start in the hang. I'll demonstrate this in a second. You'll start by holding the bar in the hang. You will unlock the knees. You will push the hips back to create hip flexion, not knee flexion. Push the hips back until the limit of your range of motion, where your back is parallel to the ground. Feet will stay flat on the ground. You'll drive through the heels, back up to the starting position, and you'll stop, and that's one rep. You won't stop at the bottom. You'll have a seamless down and up. Now, here's what it looks like. This is just 60 kilos. That's just sort of a deadlift. Hip width stance, feet are flat. Knees are unlocked, pushing the hips back. Now the goal here is to feel that the action in your upper or proximal hamstring. Because that is where the primary function of the hamstring is. That's where it's going to be important for the deadlift as well as all other physical activity. The distal action, remember, is knee flexion, so that's not relevant for our deadlifting and holding our back angle in place during movements like the squat, deadlift, and the pulling motions. So the reason that the toes need to stay flat is because if a person rocks back and puts the weight on their heels, they change their center of mass and things start moving around, and so everything shifts back, and it changes how that hamstring is going to be used and how it's going to be contracting, and essentially shifts the emphasis down to the lower hamstring, which is not what we want. So that's why the toes will be flat. The knees will be unlocked, because if they stay straight, it kind of shifts it down to the lower hamstring as well. So by unlocking it, but not bending the knees further, we're going to ensure that tension remains on the hamstring. So imagine you have a bow, not a dog named Bo, but an actual bow, like a bow and arrow. I have my bow, and then so I set my knees by unlocking them, and then I take my hips and push them back to the wall behind me, or like there's someone's face right there and you're trying to put your butt in their face. And the butt comes back, and that's what stretches the hamstrings out because they attach up under on your ischial tuberosity under your butt cheek or the gluteal fold. So set the knees, hips come back, and that's what stretches the hamstring out. Now, if we bend the knees even further, then the bow is just going to come back and it reduces tension. Okay? So the reason that is because the hamstrings function, the distal end is knee flexion. So if you flex the knees during the movement, you are shortening the hamstrings, and therefore they are not maintaining their tension. They are not going to be able to shorten anymore to extend the hip, and therefore they're not doing anything to contribute to that hip extension. So that's why it's important for you to not flex your knee more than just unlocking the knee. And that's one of the critical fail points that people do all the time with this movement, because they want to load up a bunch of fucking weight, look like they're fucking cool guys in the gym, and just RDL a shitload, and it just looks like a bastardized reverse deadlift. And that's not going to be successful here. It's not going to be what helps develop the hamstrings as much as doing this movement correctly. Okay, so you don't need a lot of weight to do this. Very strong folk won't do much more than 250, 275. I'm going to put 100 kilos on, which is about what I would use on a regular basis. Now keep in mind that this is a great exercise to balance out that posterior chain, because if you are doing a lot of anterior chain movements, or you're just not mechanically efficient in your squatting and stuff, you'll get very anterior dominant, and this happens a lot with CrossFitters. They're very anterior dominant, large quads, not a lot of hamstring going on back there. And you can see professional athletes with this issue too. So this is a great exercise for developing that if you're doing it correctly. So we're after upper hamstring. We're going to push the hips back, and then we're going down to the point which we're feeling in our upper hamstrings, toes are staying flat, and we're just driving your heels to the floor. So it's just, so you can see it again with more than 60 kilos. This is 100 kilos. So a little deadlift. Unlock the knees, big breath. Don't drop the bar. So, the critical points here: toes flat, pushing the hips back, driving through the heels as it comes up. You want the hamstrings to do to be the thing that extends the hip. And we'll talk about that in a second. Excuse me. So as far as set and reps go for this particular movement, you can approach it in two different ways. You can approach it on trying to strengthen the hamstrings or develop them. Developing is going to be more of a hypertrophy thing, or swoller trophy, if you will. We're just growing, so that's going to be more reps. 3 sets of 10 with a bit lighter weight. Or if you want to approach that strength training side, it's going to be 3 sets of 5 with heavier weight. For some reason, sometimes I'll do 3 sets of 6. Wife asked why, so I don't know. It's what I did a long time ago, so I kept doing it. So the weight is going to change with those. This isn't something that you want to load up with weight. Like I said earlier, be a Tommy Tough guy. You want to do this correctly, because the muscle action is what is important here. The muscle action is different than just getting the bar from point A to point B. That's powerlifting. Getting the bar from your chest to lockout with whatever mechanics is what makes you win in powerlifting. But it doesn't make you develop like your pecs and your triceps and all that efficiently. The same thing here. We're not just trying to move the weight from the hang position down and then back up however we can, because that's a bastardized reverse deadlift, and it does not develop the proximal hamstrings like we want it to. So this movement is dependent on muscle action, and that is entirely critical on the upper hamstrings receiving the load, getting stretched, and then contracting to bring the bar back up. It's all about the upper hamstrings and being in control of that. You can even do these a little bit of speed-wise if you're controlling the way down and then fast up if you've been doing them for a while. But the point is muscle action of the upper hamstrings is important. You're not focusing on the back or the arms pulling it, it's just the hamstrings doing the work. And that's different than just moving from point A to point B. So you have to develop that awareness of how that muscle feels. You might have that muscle-mind connection, which is a stupid term just to mean that you know what muscle you're actually working and innervating in a given movement. Lastly, how are you going to program this movement? Personally, I like to put deadlifts at the end of a week, like on a Friday or so, because the trainee will have the weekend to recover. They usually have better sleep, better food on the weekend, and therefore they come into training the next week fresher. So therefore, I like to put RDLs at the beginning of the week because that allows them to still get the posterior chain work done and then have enough days off in between, like they have Tuesday off, Wednesday, Thursday off before that Friday deadlift session in order to not have a debilitating effect from doing RDLs too close to the actual deadlift day. Because you wouldn't want to do these the day before deadlift day, not even 2 days before. And if you do these correctly, and you haven't been doing them before, and you use a light amount of weight, 50 to 60 kilos, even for a dude that weighs over 200 pounds, you should be sore. Even if you used to do them and you haven't done them in a while, and you do 60 kilos for 3 sets of 10, you should be sore in your upper hamstring. And if you're not, then you might want to think about, or try and film yourself, have a coach look at you, figure out what's going on and like why you're not sore from that given movement, because this particular movement will make you sore if you're not used to it. So, programming, I like throwing at the beginning of the week. You wouldn't want to do it the day before power cleans or any kind of snatch and cleaning. You can throw it into an Olympic weightlifting program. Just be aware of where you're throwing it in, especially if you haven't been doing them, because they will have an effect on your second pull. Will be kind of diminished the day after for the next couple days because your hamstrings are kind of smoked. It works real well with the low bar squat. Oh, and last thing about programming, whenever I have people high bar squat, I'll always have them RDL at least some point in the week because the high bar squat has a little bit of propensity to not work the proximal hamstrings as much as, say, the low bar squat. It still does, but it just helps promote that like synergy across the posterior and anterior chain as far as developing both together if you're RDLing with your vertical style squatting like the high bar and front squat. Okay, so here's the review sheet, because I talked a lot. For the RDL, how to do it: feet and toes flat on the ground because that'll shift where the emphasis of the hamstrings are if you lift your toes. The knees are unlocked because you need to set the front of your bow, and then hips back is what pulls that bow string back. You want to feel in the upper hamstrings. If you do not, then you're doing something wrong. So re-situate yourself and figure it out. Set and rep scheme: 3 sets of 5 for strength, 3 sets of 10 for growth. You focus on muscle action. That's important. I'm tapping this over and over because that's important. And then programming, I like them early in the week, and I like them with vertical style squatting. My name is Justin. This is 70sbig.com, and this is Chalk Talk, and you should do RDLs.